everyone, welcome back. So this is part 3 of our pizza dough series, and I'm going to be using my favorite pizza dough recipe, which actually comes from this book here. In the book, it's a whole wheat pizza dough, but I actually swap out the whole wheat flour and use bread flour instead. The other cool part is that this author came up with the neat idea of, instead of making one big dough, you can break the dough into 4 different pieces to make individual pies, which I thought was really great. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get into this recipe, and I'm going to stop at different points along the way to point out some different things. All right, everyone, so we're going to go ahead and get started mixing up our dough. So in the bowl, I have 1 1/4 cups of warm water. Now, if you actually measure the temperature of the water, warm is not exactly what I thought warm was. Warm actually felt pretty hot to me. And I've always used warmer than normal water anyway, because I knew that the bowl would be cold and cool down the water, and that the yeast needs a certain temperature to actually interact really well. But the problem is that if you use water that's too hot, you'll actually damage or kill the yeast. So go ahead and experiment with that and measure the temperature of the water. They recommend the water temperature for warm being 100 to 110 degrees. So after you add your water, you're gonna add a tablespoon of sugar. And then to that, you're going to add a packet, or if you don't have a packet and you have a jar of yeast, 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. There's 1, there's 2, and then go ahead and add a 1/4. All right. Now I do give this a little stir. And my mom always told me to be gentle with yeast, that you don't want to hurt it or damage it. So I'm just going to mix it up there, help the sugar dissolve into the water, and then help the yeast get going as it goes ahead and eats the sugar. I'm going to put this right over here. Okay. So once that has a little bit of time to get going, I'm going to go ahead and add 1 1/2 cups of bread flour to the mix. And you can kind of already see that the bread yeast is doing its thing. So I'm going to go ahead and add 1 1/2 cups of bread yeast, or bread flour. And I'm going to go ahead and give that a stir. So I like to scrape the sides, work in the middle, and then okay, so the recipe says that we're gonna go ahead and wait 10 minutes for this phase of the dough to actually go ahead and look foamy. So I'm gonna give it 10 minutes to kind of do its thing, and I will be back for the next phase. All right, so it's been about 10 minutes and our dough is starting to look a little bit foamy. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to add, the recipe calls to add another 1.5 cups of flour and also to add a teaspoon of salt. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add less than 1.5 cups of flour. I believe I threw in 1 1/4 cups, just to give you an idea of what dough looks like when there's not enough flour added to it. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I will add the correct amount of flour, continuing to add flour until I get a consistency of dough that's pretty good. And then I will go ahead and add too much flour, so you can see what that looks like as well. And I'll go ahead and stop and pull out the dough at different points in time. So I actually use my spoon to mix in the flour initially, and then I'm gonna go ahead and knead the dough. I pretend that I'm a bread machine sometimes at this point, like I'm a big dough hook. Okay, so once the dough gets to this, what I call shaggy phase, I go ahead and just get the dough off the spoon. And then I'm gonna go ahead and knead the dough. So I work the dough under and then push it into the middle and push down with my knuckles. Now you can see the dough at this point is very sticky. So trying to work this dough, it's getting stuck to my knuckles, stuck to my fingers, so we're definitely gonna have to add more flour. So I sprinkle it across the dough just to kind of make it a little bit more even. All right. Again, this is just my technique for kneading dough. I have no idea if it's the correct technique or not. I just lift up and push down with my knuckles in the middle. And then just rotate it a little bit so that the different parts are getting worked in. Okay, so that little bit of flour that I added is actually doing pretty good. You can see I'm not really getting any new dough sticking to my hands. The consistency of the dough is starting to look really nice. And I actually read online this really neat tip about how to know when your dough is actually looking pretty good and when to stop adding flour to it. So I'm gonna add just a little bit more because it feels a little bit sticky to me still. And this article said that you know when you are good with your dough when you feel the dough and it feels like the adhesive strip on a Post-it note. So if you can touch it and it feels just a little bit sticky, but it's not sticking to you. So if you see here, it's not sticking to me, but it definitely has a little bit of a sticky feel to it. That's when you know you're at a good point with your dough. And you can see here, again, it has that little bit of adhesive sticky feel to it, but again, it's not sticking to my hands whatsoever, unlike the dough that had not enough flour. So this is actually a really nice dough. It has a good feel to it. It's nice and soft. It's well mixed. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to kill the dough and I'm gonna add a lot more flour. We're gonna keep kneading here. We're just gonna make our dough unfortunate and dry, and so you can see it's starting to not work its way back together very well. It's actually getting really hard to work, and it's just not incorporating well at all. It's not forming that nice round supple dough ball. You're starting to get rips and tears in the dough. So at this point, you know, you definitely have too much flour going on. So with the sticky dough, you're gonna add more flour. With dry dough like this, you're gonna wanna go ahead and add some water to it. Again, to get that consistency and that feeling of the adhesive strip on a Post-it or sticky note.